friends, welcome back to the channel. It's Tori. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my current top 10 reads of 2023 and the 5 most disappointing reads of 2023. So this year I have read a total of 44 books by the end of June, which honestly I am really happy about. I read, I think, 64 books or 68 books last year in the whole year, so I'm definitely on track to flying over that record from last year, which, to be honest, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to how many books in the year I read. I want to read as many as I can, but I don't really find it competitive. Like, I'm not sitting here trying to break any records, personal or otherwise, but it's just kind of fun to be able to see that I am definitely on track to reading more books than I did last year, so that's pretty cool. I don't know if I'm going to get to 100. That would be cool to be able to say that I've read 100 books in a year. I don't know if it's going to happen. If it does, great. If it doesn't, also fine. Let's start with my most disappointing reads of 2023. I have picked out 5 books to showcase here, and I want to make a disclaimer before I share these with you guys that, once again, these are books that if they didn't work for me, they work for a lot of other people. These are books that people have read and loved, so my opinion of them is purely subjective and should be treated that way. The first book that I'm going to highlight in this is actually a manga that I read this year that I'm still frustrated about it. So last year I watched the TV series on Netflix called Alice in Borderland, which is a TV show about a group of people who get transported into this post-apocalyptic nightmare, essentially, and it's very survival game based. It's fantastic if you're a fan of or have heard of Squid Game. In my opinion, it was better than Squid Game. I actually liked it more than I enjoyed the other. I read the first 3 volumes of the Alice in Borderland manga series, and I was just so disappointed. I was so disappointed in them. The sexual objectification of the female characters in the manga was off the charts. It was insane how much of it there was. Every single frame with every single female character. There was a point where, in my opinion, a female body of someone who had been deceased was drawn in a very suggestive, questionable manner, and I was just like, you know, I actually preferred the TV series where the female characters were, I don't know, characters. So that was a big disappointment, but that being said, I will continue to encourage people to watch the television series on Netflix because I think they did a fantastic job bringing out all of the best parts of a very interesting concept and story. Next up, I'm going to highlight Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. This was a book that I read that's a historical fiction that tells the story of the Greek and Trojan War and the story of Achilles from the perspective of Briseis, who is captured and she is brought back to the Greek camp as a slave and becomes Achilles' slave. And while I 100% believe that stories like this that kind of expose some of the darker sides of what the heroes of history actually were involved with, I really didn't like this book, which kind of surprised me. I found that it was there was a lot of modern language thrown in with a very ancient setting, which always pulls me out, and the way that the author portrayed several of the relationships within the story was kind of misleading in my opinion, and I don't want to say too much more about that for spoilers' sake. There were some merits to it, but overall I was really hoping for a better read than I got. Next up is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This is a classic, I don't know if you, I mean, it's a classic horror novel, right? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was a book that I buddy read with my friends Trisha, Evie, and Kay. I will link all of their channels down below in the description, and we had a great conversation about it, and we really had so much to discuss with this book, which was great. But the thing that really bothered me about this is, and I think part of this is that I'm a product of the times that I live in. I live in an era where I feel like horror has become such a visualized thing in a lot of film, and just, I mean, it's everywhere. So I think that the impact that this type of a story had on the readership at the time is so much different than the reaction that I, as a modern reader, have to it. And that's not necessarily a fault of the story per se. It's just, I did not like how the characters were portrayed. There were a lot of things where I felt like it was very anticlimactic. I don't know. I just felt like it was a very lackluster, underwhelming read. And that's about all I have to say about it. The fourth book on this list is Lancelot by Giles Christian, which again, I had every anticipation of loving. It is the story of Arthur in a more historical setting, with some fantasy mixed in from the first person POV of Lancelot. You can go watch my review of this book. This one really frustrated me. The story was all over the place, and the character work and motives for me was very, very lackluster and convenient, and that was something that really drove me bonkers. And Guinevere as a character in this story really frustrated me, and I just really struggled to finish this book, to be perfectly honest. So that was another one that I imagined really loving and was surprised that I had the experience that I did with it. And last but certainly not least is a book that probably won't surprise any of you that have been watching recent events on the channel, and that is The Last Argument of Kings by Joe Abercrombie, which is hilarious, and you'll see why it's hilarious when I switch over to my top 10 reads of 2023. I'm in the camp of people who really did not like the ending of this book, and I want to make something very clear about this. It is not the fact that this is a grimdark, it's not the fact that everybody didn't get the happy ending. Like, I knew that going into this, that wasn't the type of book that I was reading. Anybody who goes into this trilogy, that's not a spoiler. Like, there's a lot of nihilism in this story. And it wasn't that. It really wasn't that. It was the plot structure of the story, the complete removal of agency, and the point of the rest of the trilogy just disappeared at the end of this book. I really struggled with some of the character contrivances and elements within this series, and overall I just was really frustrated by the ending, and just, I love Joe Abercrombie's writing style. I am definitely looking forward to reading more of his work, but this ending, and this is now the second trilogy of his that I've read that I really did not like the ending, because I also read his Shattered Sea trilogy, but that's another story. So that one goes on this list, and those are the 5 books that I was most disappointed in this year in terms of reading experience. And then once again, these are all books that I know other people have really absolutely loved. So if you feel like you would have a better experience reading them, please feel free to check them out, add them to your TBR, and give them a shot. And I'd love to hear your experience with them as well. All right, let's go into ending on a high note. We're going to talk about my top 10 reads thus far in 2023. There are some indies, there are some historical fiction, there are some like books that surprised me on this list. I'm so excited. Once again, if you're watching this and you're also a reader, please drop your favorite reads of 2023 so far down below in the comments. I would absolutely love to check them out. And also, side note, if you're liking the video and you're enjoying my content, please like and subscribe to support the channel. And if you're interested in checking out my no obligations Patreon with the exclusive Discord server and more backstage information about my writing process and channel, that's all in the description box below. These are in absolutely no particular order. I just made a stack of them because there's no way that I could possibly, it would have taken me way too long to try to rank them all. So the first book that I'm going to talk about in my top 10 reads so far in 2023 is a book that I actually finished on June 30th. That is The Wickwire Watch by Jacqueline Hagan. This is an indie fantasy book that I absolutely love. So the basic premise of this story, and I'm planning on doing a dedicated review for it, is that There's a young boy named Inkwell Featherfield who is a runaway. He finds himself the target of some dark spirits that he didn't even know existed, and the only people that can help him are wanted fugitives. That was the very general elevator pitch that the author Jacqueline Hagan gave me during our author interview. But I also feel like to describe this to other people, I have used the combination of Oliver Twist meets Howl's Moving Castle. And that's about as close as I think I could get to this book. The found family aspects in this book, once again, as you guys know, I absolutely love that. And it is present in this story. There's so much mystery. There's so much intrigue to the magic system. The main character of this story, Inkwell Featherfield, is a young protagonist who follows in the giant footsteps of characters like Locke Lamora, the Artful Dodger, Huckleberry Finn, and I absolutely love that kind of roguish coming-of-age story that has a big, big heart behind it. This book is fantastic. I cannot wait to talk more about it in the dedicated review. But yeah, this one absolutely is going on my top 10 reads of the year so far. I had an absolute blast with it, and I cannot wait to pick up book 2. Next up, and this is the one that I said would be kind of funny, is Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. This is book 2 of the First Law trilogy, and while the ending really did not land for me, book 2 was a 5-star read. I absolutely loved this book. I loved, there was a character arc in here that I think might be one of my favorite fantasy character arcs between book 1 and 2. Absolutely loved it. The characterization is fantastic. The dialogue is fantastic. Like, his writing style is so good, which is, I think, why the third book was such a major disappointment to me in terms of story structure. But I gotta say, I absolutely loved book 2. It was a great time, and it was one of the first ones that I put on this list. Next up is Legend by David Gemmell. It is the story of a incredibly powerful and legendary axe warrior, Druss. And Druss basically comes in to boost the morale and fight alongside a group of soldiers that are defending a outpost against a massive army. It's a siege. There's a lot of very tense military fantasy going on in this story. And what I absolutely loved about this, I flew through this book, and the commentary on the life of soldiers, the conversations about mortality and loyalty and courage and all of the things. I absolutely loved this book. I had a great time with it. There was one trope that this book uses at a point towards the beginning that almost had me DNFing the story, but that's a me thing. We're gonna leave it there. But overall, this was still a 5-star experience, and man, like, the characters in this book really, I was shocked at how much I enjoyed this. Next up is The Martian by Andy Weir. This is a book that is a science fiction about a man named Mark Watney, who is a biologist who goes up with a group of astronauts to take some samples from Mars. It's a mission to Mars story, and he gets marooned on Mars by himself and has to survive. And oh my goodness sakes, this book, I loved this book. This is definitely going to be a reread book for me. I loved it. The characterization and voice of Mark Watney as a character is one of my favorites I've read in a long time. I love the author's use of formatting and the way that he goes between perspectives and the different angles he provides on the story and the way that he utilizes kind of an epistolary format for a lot of it. It's just brilliantly written. I absolutely loved this book, and it's a massive recommend for anybody that's looking to dip their toes into some science fiction. And yeah, it's just a great book. Next up is the chonkiest book that I have read this year, and it's probably not going to surprise most of you that Shogun is making yet another appearance on my channel. This one, you know, this was just a mind-blowing experience of a book. And I feel like anytime you read a book that is 1,200 pages of historical fiction, it takes a lot for me to be convinced that a book needs to be 1,200 pages long. This is a book that I buy it hook, line, and sinker, because other than chapter 40, if you know, you know, this book was just masterful. This is the story of Blackthorn, an English sailor who gets washed up on the shores of feudal Japan after a shipwreck in the 1600s. And man, the combination of just trying to survive in a completely foreign culture, the beauty of the culture as he discovers it, and the clash between where he comes from and feudal Japan, and the politics going on in the world at the time, and as he gets more and more integrated into the politics between the Japanese samurai lords, it's incredible. Like, this is such an incredible book, and I know that this is one that I will go back and reread at some point. I had a fantastic time with this story. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and for anyone who's been waiting to pull the trigger, because I recognize how intimidating this book is, trust me, I get it. It's worth every single page. Next up is another historical fiction, and that is Augustus by John Williams. I read this after seeing the Library of Alexandria, Alan's review of it, and several other people that were reading, and I thought, you know what? This is an era of history I don't get into that much, but I'm really curious and I want to expand my horizons a little bit. And this, I mean, they're praising the prose to the absolute skies, so it has to be good, right? Man, you guys, this is a book that I do not for a second believe is going to move off of this top 10 list all the way through to the end of the year. The use of epistolary format in this book is the best I've ever seen. It's brilliantly crafted. This is a book that made me stop and back up and take a look at my own writing. And I love it when books do that. I love books that challenge me as a writer and make me really dive deep into the craft of what I do. And this book absolutely did that for me. This is the story of Caesar Augustus and his rise to power and maintenance of that power, and then the end of his life. And it's told from the perspectives mostly of the people around him, friends, family, allies, enemies, and man, like, as far as a lesson in just beautifully crafted literature, I don't know that I could pick a book that I would recommend faster. Now we're going to take a little bit of a swing back into the indie community, because the last 3 books on my list were standout indie reads for me this year, and books that I have been recommending to people all over the place. I'm curious to know if you guys have been watching my channel this year, if you're going to guess which 3 books are on that list. You probably aren't going to be surprised by them. We'll just put it that way. The first one is Seasons of Albion by Ilan Marche and Christopher Warman, husband and wife duo, creative extraordinaires, who created this tiny little book that takes place over kind of 4 seasons within this world, and we follow 3 characters that are all sort of thread tied together but have their own closed circuit unique stories. And it reads like a combination of Grimm's fairy tales and Miyazaki films from Studio Ghibli. Like, it's such a punch. This tiny little book packs such a massive punch. The second story, I think it's the second story, don't let this cover fool you. There are some very dark fantasy moments in this book. There's just some wonderful commentary about human nature and people, and it's hard to explain. It's so good. I feel like I'm doing a horrible job pitching this book, but if you haven't read it, what do you have to lose? It's absolutely tiny, and if you're looking for something to give you a little step into indie fantasy, get a little taste, this is absolutely a book that I would recommend to people picking up. I've been telling everybody to read it because it's fantastic. It's a tiny short read, and I will be shocked if you're able to put it down. Moving right along to another indie fantasy that I absolutely loved this year. This is another indie debut, and that is The Blood of Crows by Alex C. Pierce. I do have interviews with both this author and the authors of Seasons of Albion So check those out. But this book takes a character that is kind of, if you imagine the Lies of Locke Lamora having a little brother. The main character is Ren, who has some nimble fingers and has been raised in a squadron of military that does some underhanded dealings on the side. And he is a con artist and a thief, basically. And he's wonderful. He's a great main character. And if you take all of that, you have your thief, young thief, coming of age main character, and you drop him into the middle of a murder mystery in a very intimate fantasy setting. It's good. It's so good, you guys. This book really surprised me in terms of the story structure and the way that the author really played and experimented with how to put this story together. It's hard for me to be super surprised by books now, and this book literally had me going, what? Wait, what? So many times in a good way, and I loved that. I loved the experience of reading this book. I cannot wait for book 2, and yeah, I absolutely cannot recommend this highly enough. Once again, it's a pretty short read, so if you're looking for something easy and quick and fun to pick up and check out. This also is a book that has one of my favorite backstory explanations in a book that I've read in a very long time. It's done in a beautifully crafted way, and I got really geeky about it when I read it. It exposes the backstory of one of the side characters in a way that just breaks your heart and is impressive all at the same time. So massive shout out to this book. I had a fantastic time with it, and it is definitely one of my top reads of the year. And last of all, this is a book and series that you guys will not be shocked to see on this list, and that is Spirits of Vengeance by Rob J. Hayes. This is book 3 in the Mortal Technique series, which is a group of standalone Asian-inspired wuxia magic combat stories that they're standalones, but they all tie together. And I really had a great time with Never Die and Pawn's Gambit, the books preceding this. But when I read Spirits of Vengeance and saw all of the Easter eggs and the through lines from the first 2 books, and just the way that this book elevated the entire series up to that point, I fell in absolute love with it. I loved this book. I love it so much, and I love the way that Rob Hayes plays with Asian-inspired folklore and supernatural characters, and it... For those of us who grew up on, anime shows, especially the shonen anime shows and martial arts films and all of that, they're amazing stories that are also going to hit that vein of nostalgia, and I loved the experience of reading them. Alright guys, so hi. I'm in a different shirt because I literally finished editing this video, completely got to the end, was about ready to upload it, and suddenly recounted the number of books that I included in my top 10 and realized that I had completely forgot to include one and that there were only 9. And so I am back to share with you my 10th book that was supposed to be on this list. So The Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham is a set of 4 books that I started reading back in June, but I had to sit down and decide which of the 2 books I was going to include because I only wanted to do one per author. And trying to decide between A Shadow and Summer and A Betrayal in Winter, I still haven't decided. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to include both of them because it's my channel and I can do what I want. The Long Price Quartet is an absolutely masterful, character-focused, deep perspective fantasy series that doesn't have a ton of action in it, but the depth of the world building and the political maneuvering and just the authenticity of the world in this series is kind of blowing my mind. And everybody told me that the first couple of books, like, oh, if you're not really feeling it, just wait, because the payoff in books 3 and 4 are gonna be incredible. And I don't know if I'm gonna survive books 3 and 4 based on the 5-star experiences I've already had in book 1 and 2. But there's absolutely no way that I could not put this on this list. I do intend to do more videos with more details on my thoughts about the Long Price Quartet, but overall, right now, I just have to say this series deserves way more attention in the fantasy community than I have seen it getting. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. And it is a thought-provoking, very deep, slow burn, beautifully character-led story. So that's all I'm going to say about it right now. But editing Tori out. Thanks for putting up with me. This is a professional channel, y'all. All right, guys, that is officially my top 10, and I don't know if I'd say like the bottom 5. It's like 5 books that were disappointing reads for me in this year so far. I have had a fantastic year of reading so far. It's kind of mind-blowing, honestly, how many 5-star and new favorites I've had, and it's just been a really exciting year of reading for me. So I hope you guys are also having a fantastic year of reading. I would love to hear down in the comments if you have some favorites you want to share, some books that didn't quite land for you. Feel free to share those too. And I'm buckled in and ready for the next 6 months of the year and reading and having a great time and finding more new favorites. So I hope you guys are having a great week. I hope that you are reading 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.